Oh, hello there. I'm a professional painter who likes to craft, and I'm going to show you how I made 3 popular fall crafts I found on Pinterest to see how doable they are, all in the air dry clay category. I'm going to set up my space here while I tell you about what I want to make. The first thing I found was this ghost, literally all over Pinterest, and it looks simple enough to do, but what if it were a Mothman? The next thing was a food-themed light switch plate, which is incredible, and I think a cherry pie light switch is more in our future. Lastly, I found this, a cute way to make a mason jar more on theme, but let's swap it for a witch's hat. I'm so excited. I have light experience with clay through art school, but this will be the first time I'm trying these crafts. I'll list all the supplies I'm using in the description for you, and I mean most supplies I found around my house. Oh, and quick disclaimer, mistakes are gonna happen. I've never been perfect at anything I've done, and I'll call them out as I go so that you can have an easier time, you know, if you do end up wanting to try this at home too. I'm showing you everything that happens here because the journey is just as important as the result. So with that, let's get started. First up is a cherry pie light switch cover, and this is the reference photo I'm going to be using. And guys, this was incredibly hard. Just know that going into this, it's going to be a rough journey to watch. That flinch you're seeing is because I hate the idea that there's gonna be clay underneath my fingernails as I'm doing this, but you know, we're gonna get over that texture thing. It's great. This is gonna be so fun. Okay, so I'm gonna grab a handful of clay about the size of my palm, looks about right to cover the light switch plate. I'm gonna grab my glass next to flatten out the clay. I read online that the ideal thickness for air dry clay is around a 1/4 inch thick. If it's thinner, it could break as it's drying, and the thicker it is, the longer it takes to dry. So, eyeballing it, this looked correct. Wouldn't you agree? This is the moment that I think I should have done things differently. So my plan here is to have it dry directly on the light switch plate, not knowing if it's going to actually stay stuck to it when it dries, which sounds like a solid plan, honestly, keeping it simple. But because I know what happens next, just stick to making a clay impression of the plate using plastic wrap on the plate so that the clay doesn't stick to it directly or doesn't dry on it directly. And yeah, I'm just gonna leave it there. Okay, back to what I'm doing. So yeah, okay, I almost forgot here, but you need to make divots and space around the screws and where the light switch goes so that it's easier to access. And yeah, it's looking cute. You can use water to smooth out any cracks as you're doing this. And again, this was not very good forethought at all. Please do not carve the cherries out first like I'm doing. This was like truly like a waste of time because clearly I want to put the strips of the pie over it, and it's going to cover like 60% of the cherries. But you know what? It was a good thought, a good initial thought for sure. Okay, so now I'm going to take these scraps that I used, like that were left over from trimming around the light switch, and this is I'm gonna use them to make the pie strips. Lattice work is the proper term I think I'm looking for. So to make the strips is I use a little bit too much water here, so that's why I was sticking to the glass, but you know, we're making it work. And also this pokey tool, incredible. It felt like drawing the entire time, and obviously my strength is not 3D work, it is, you know, painting. So anything that makes it feel more like drawing is great. So pokey tool, I highly recommend if you're also like me and more of like a 2D artist. Next up is scoring. This is an essential part of clay crafts. It's how you're gonna ensure an added piece of clay stays on your main sculpture. First, make crisscross tick marks on the piece and then on the place you're gonna stick it to on the sculpture. Then you'll add some water onto the marks, either on the piece or on the sculpture. Then just stick it on. The idea of lattice work is quite complex, and I feel like I was starting to get confused going one piece at a time. So I ended up kind of placing all of the pieces all at once on the piece, like not sticking them on right away, but just kind of like laying them out so I know where to go, what size pieces I need, etc. And it kind of looked like this, and that was very helpful. And as you can see, it did cover up most of the cherries. So I would suggest, like, after you're done adding on all these strips, like, you know, in a more permanent fashion, then you would go in the gaps and create the cherries. My thought before was that it would be a little bit easier to do it first so you didn't have to kind of work in like those nooks and crannies. But yeah, I think it would be far better to do it like the way I just mentioned. Okay, it's looking more impressive now, right? To make the lattice work more believable, I'm going to make the under and over effect a bit more exaggerated. I'm using this tool to push down the areas that are going under, and then the pokey tool to clean up the scalloped edges. I have the highest of hopes at this point of time. So now on to the next craft. You don't know your Mothman lore, you're totally missing out. To put it simply, he, meaning a large humanoid cryptid with moth wings, appeared to a small town as an omen that something was going to happen. A bridge collapsed later on. I mean, look it up or listen to Two Girls One Ghost, Morbid explain the tale. It's uber interesting, and he's become something bigger than all of this online. I mean, a sexy Mothman costume was happening, and there's even a statue you can visit in West Virginia. All this to say, I want to make the ghost into a cutesy Mothman. First, I'm going to make the base for the clay to rest on. I'll plastic wrap on top of the tinfoil to give it the best chance of the clay not sticking to the tinfoil. Scissors were needed to trim the excess amount. I just eyeballed the height and shape. I was going for a smallish mound shape, like that initial Pinterest photo I showed you. And yeah, I think it's perfect. Also, low-key made the ghost before I saw that the example on Pinterest used plastic wrap too, so just ignore this. Going with another handful of clay, then I'll flatten it out into a circular shape. I don't mind if it's not a perfect circle because ghosties have wavy edges on the bottom of their form, still aiming for the 1/4 inch thickness. Now I'll drape the clay over the base like so. It naturally folds down a bit and around the form as you're seeing. My strategy is to make more intentional wings on the side. I'll pinch it in half and then manipulate the center to almost look like a body with like little nubbins for legs. I'll do this for both sides, and I'm going to smooth out the cracks as I go with a touch of water. Now I'm going to carve out his eyes. Went with my favorite pokey tool, and I just made ovals, following the vibe of the plushie reference. Eee, he looks so cute already. Now, obviously, the best part about this guy are his red eyes. I'm going to make that happen. I had a takeout lid that was an excellent candidate for clear plastic, and you get where I'm going with this? We're going to make some contact lenses here. I cut out some ovals slightly larger than the holes themselves. Then I tucked in the pieces of plastic within the edges of the holes, squishing some of the clay to cover the edge of the plastic too. The next important feature of Mothman are those feather antennas. I grabbed 2 little pieces of clay, about an inch long. I cleaned out the center of them for drying purposes, still leaving a lip to it so that piece can adhere to the sculpture better. Then I made a slit in the center of one side and used my fingers to round out and separate the pieces. I'm following the shape I see in the reference. Cute! Now I'm going to do the slip and score thing to make sure it sticks to the top of his head well. I'm going to use this tool to help me blend in the seam of the antenna into the head. I repeated the same with the opposite antenna. And just look at him! He's ready to dry, which means the next craft is up. This video by DIY Guru on Pinterest is my main inspo. It seems as simple as smushing clay onto the lid of the mason jar and then putting what you like on top, which I can do. Here's the mason jar in question. I really don't know where you can find a ball mason jar this size. I'll just need the lid for now. Now the witch's hat, that is my inspo, but I think in my head I was picturing more Harry Potter vibes. I grabbed a slightly smaller amount of clay than the past two crafts, flattened it out like so, then trimmed it to the size of the lid. Okay, I think we're on track here. So now I'm just gonna smush it down and around the edges of the lid, like the video. Okay, the base looks good. I really want this lid to be wearing a hat rather than a hat be placed on it, which means I want to add the brim of the hat to the circumference of the lid on the top edge though. I still had the leftover clay with the lid shape in it, so I grabbed that tool again and just drew a wavy brim outside of that circle. And honestly, not a bad fit. Just needed to trim out a small section. Then use water to smooth it out and blend it into the lid. I do regret not properly binding it. I should have done a slip and score moment, but it gave the correct vibe I was looking for. Now to create the base of the hat. I started with about a 1/4 cup of clay and molded it into a triangular shape, pulling and tapering the top to look like the cartoon witch hat. Then I hollowed out the center. Finding those details as I go, I kept checking it to make sure it would fit in the center of the lid too. It was looking awkwardly large for this brim, so I took off a bit from the bottom, and yeah, felt way better. Proceeded to slip and score, then I blended it into the base. And it looks like a witch's hat. The imperfections I feel are great for the character too. And now it's off to dry. It says on the container that it takes 2 days for the air dry clay to fully dry, and this is what it looked like after 1 day. Clearly the witch's hat has some cracking that needs to be fixed first. See, it's right along where that brim is. I really must not have adhered it well. What I can do now is create some slip. Slip is watered down clay, mixed into a paste consistency. This is how much clay I'm going to use and how much water. Then the best version of paste was off to the side of this little cup. And why we own so many small things like this, I really couldn't tell you. Then I grabbed a paintbrush. Your paintbrush won't be ruined when you do this either, so you don't need to aim for like a disposable kind. Clay is very easy to rinse out and clean with solely water, honestly. Now I'll just shove as much of that paste as I can into the crack. That should hold up and repair what's happening. Now begins the true test of patience. So as I repaired the hat, the cherry pie really deteriorated. I mean, look at that. So my first plan was to take it off the plate and rebuild the crust. The clay was still wet enough that I did more slip and score action to put the pieces together and some slip to repair the rest of it. Then I left it alone for a weekend to dry. You'll know when your clay is dry when it looks a solid white, if you're using the same Crayola kind as me at least, and if it doesn't feel cold anymore. Although I realized that I already built this guy too short to fit onto the plate again. Okay, cool. So next course of action was to break off the bottom crust and rebuild it. And I guess the other side was weak too because that broke off as I was breaking off that bottom piece. So I proceeded to rebuild the crust layer with fresh clay, making sure it had the impression of the main piece on it, and let it dry on the plate. So I left it to dry for a day, and the next day it was cracking pretty bad, so I got the slip method out, repaired. Or so I thought. My next problem, I couldn't get the main piece under the new crust, so logically I had to take the new crust off the plate first. I thought I was doing it gently, only everything proceeded to completely fall apart. This is where I was questioning the point of this craft. I really don't think it's this hard for most people. It truly looks so easy to do on Pinterest too. Yeah, I haven't given up yet because most of it is dry at this point. My next solution was hot glue. I was able to glue the base to the plate, and okay, this leads to the next part. But the surface of the clay does need to be sealed before you paint it or attempt to have anything stick to it because it'll just absorb it or it's just not going to work. You need to seal it first. And I'm not quite sure why the base stuck to the plate fine, but as you can see, gluing the crust edges together did not work. The glue did not stick to that surface. So Mod Podge or Gesso works to seal the surface of the clay. I went with Mod Podge in this scenario. It only takes 2 hours to dry. After the Mod Podge dried, I continued to put it back together again with hot glue. Look, paint can hide a lot, so stay tuned. Ugh, I need a healthy break from her. Here are the exact kinds of Mod Podge and Gesso I have. While Mod Podge takes a few hours to dry, Gesso does need a full day. I would suggest Gesso if you want to build up more of a surface and hide smaller imperfections, because you can do up to like 2 to 3 coats if you'd like. I chose that route for Mothman. I went with Mod Podge for the witch's hat. Mothman was the quickest to dry. He only took 2 days, and then the witch's hat did take about 3 full days. Okay, Now, the fun part! Let's make these guys come to life. The first thing I did was work on Mothman's eyes to make them red. I went in with a Q-tip to clean off any clay smudges. Then I grabbed a red Sharpie to color them in. I don't love the long-lasting effects of a Sharpie on plastic though. It could smudge. I'm not sure I show this, but I did mix some red paint with Mod Podge, making sure it was transparent, and like you use a Mod Podge to kind of dilute the red paint, and I painted that over the eyes again to ensure that it would stay red. Although maybe if you added just the Mod Podge over the red Sharpie, that would work just the same too. As you can see, I'm using my black acrylic paint to get the first layer of color on there. Acrylics dry quickly, so all of this went by relatively fast. He needed 2 coats of black paint to look solid. I used a purple gray color to get the details on there. After the paint dried, I took the base out. And look at him, standing by himself. I'm so proud. The edges on the inside of his eyes were looking a bit crusty. I initially grabbed my pokey tool to scrape it out clean on the inside, but I ended up using my fingernails to scrape most of it out. Spared you the footage of that. And much better. I like the shiny effect Mod Podge gives, so I used that to finish. And yes, will be revealed at the end. The witch's hat is next. Went with black to start, to let the hat be the brightest on the lid. Still feeling like a Harry Potter leather texture sort of hat vibe, so I went with a light brown base. I used a darker brown to shade the edges and the cracks. The first brown I painted the hat in was far too dark. I remade a brown using more yellow and red, and that was the mid-tone I needed. This sculpture naturally had divots and wrinkles to it. My goal was to highlight that and exaggerate it with the paint. I wasn't using a reference, just going with my instincts. The last steps were melting the highlights in, and again, wait for the upcoming dramatic reveal. Now, let's make the cherry pie switch pretty. I did add gesso to help the glue blend into the clay more, and I think it helped a bit. That's when I was looking at that initial cherry pie reference, and I painted what I saw, naturally deepening the shadows and crust with dark brown, adding in the crispy crust areas, and using a richer purple red color for the cherries. White was the highlight and perfect final touch. And here's the final lineup, folks. Mothman is first. This was truly a 10 out of 10 craft. Took 3 days to finish and was very easy to make. I got a cheap fake tea candle, which is what makes him glow. I would totally recommend make this or any of the ghosties. Here's the witch's hat, also 10 out of 10. I would say it's more on the intermediate side of skill level when it comes to sculpting that main hat part at least. It looks so adorable though, perfect for Halloween next month. Now the light switch plate. I love the result, but I'm gonna give her a 6 out of 10. This was almost more frustrating than fun to create and felt more of an expert level clay craft. Looks so fun though and felt like a dopamine decor moment, which is what I wanted. So yeah, so fun. Overall, I think air dry clay crafts are totally worth it. Didn't seem to be too expensive to do either. For example, the clay, which is the main thing you need to buy, is about $12 for 5 pounds. Best part, it was fun, and I did learn something new along the way. And yeah, hope you guys enjoyed watching too. Thanks for watching.